rot part warning that says, "I'm dead, stay away." Something powerful and primal in its warning. The air condition helps make it tolerable. After a hot shower, you can almost forget it. My trip back to Charleston started easy enough. I made a right at the light and started up the mountain. I had my window halfway down, smoking a cigarette. Hotel California was playing on 105, and I wondered what song had been playing on the radio when my passenger had his problems with that there arrow. Rain started coming down, so I flicked on my wipers. A coal truck pulled up behind me, his lights filling up my mirrors. I gave the van more gas and started snaking my way up the mountain. The coal truck tailgated me, his lights blinding as the rain came down in sheets. Lightning would cross the sky, and Don Henley's voice would crackle in the dark. I threw my cigarette out the window and used both hands to keep the van on the road. Left and right, I yanked the wheel, squinting into the rain. At the top of the mountain, I felt a little better when the coal truck finally turned off. Letting my eyes readjust to the darkness, I pointed the van back down the mountain. Now, it don't matter if you're going into or out of Gilbert, the fastest way is 44 over Horsepen Mountain. The mountain gets its name from the Shawnee Princess Aracoma, daughter of the great Chief Cornstalk. After her father's death, her tribe had been driven into the wilderness. When winter came, they were starving. The Shawnees stole some horses from the white settlers and brought them up to the top of the mountain. The settlers tracked them and ambushed the starving Shawnee. When it was finished, it was pretty much the end of Princess Aracoma and the rest of her people. But it was just the start of legends surrounding Horsepen Mountain. Now, folks like to tell how Cornstalk had cursed the whites when he lay down on the banks of the Ohio River. I don't know if Aracoma was as vengeful as her daddy, but I reckon Horsepen Mountain is about a top contender for haunted Indian spots. It's about the curviest road you'll ever see, and narrow as a stick of gum. It's so steep I can barely understand how it's legal or sane. The whole stretch is dark and lonely, save for a thunder of overloaded coal trucks that run over it day and night. The incline was so steep coming down, my seatbelt was the only thing keeping me from driving with my face against the windshield. The rain started to come down harder. Thunder boomed around me, and the radio went silent. The display was still lit up, just no sound. It was quiet, but for the sound of the rain and the rattling of the air conditioner. Pressing the brakes, I slowed the van and twisted the knobs of the radio. Nothing. I was cursing the idea of driving the van until Nettie could get a new radio when the headlights went out. The dash still glowed green, but other than that, I was in darkness. I pulled the van to the curb and put it in park. I switched on the hazard lights, but they didn't even blink. Figured it was something electrical, so I restarted the engine. So if I restarted the engine, maybe I could reset the problem. I pulled the key back, and the engine and the air conditioning went silent. Sitting there, pretty much at a 60-degree angle pointed down into the black, I prayed the van would start back up. Taking a deep breath, I started to turn the ignition when I heard a sound coming from the back. I was startled. Not scared, mind you, just startled. Sometimes bodies will wheeze, move, and even break wind hours after death. Still, my hand went to my chest. Leaning over my right shoulder, I looked in the back. The body was still there, still covered, and still had the shape of the arrow protruding out. Taking a deep breath, I turned back and lit up a cigarette. As I smoked, the van started to fill with light. Wasn't sure what it was at first, another electrical glitch or holy vision. I got kind of hypnotized for a moment, watching the dust dance in the smoke from my cigarette as the light cut through it. By the time I knew what was happening, it was too late to do anything. The coal truck was right on top of me. I could hear the brakes groan over the sharp splitting sound of the air horn. There was no time to pray, let alone see my life flash before my eyes. Throwing up my hands to protect myself, I imagined being ground into a bloody and metal smudge. The van shook as the coal truck missed me by inches. Opening my eyes, I saw the truck's tail lights and the spew of dust and dirt from where it hit the shoulder. It roared down the mountain and out of sight like an angry ghost. Now I must have hit the gear shift when I flung up my hands because the van had begun to roll forward. So slowly I didn't notice at first, then picking up speed. I was panicked for a moment, my feet stomping around trying to find the brake like a baby throwing a tantrum. I was jerking the wheel back and forth with no light at all. Like I said, a bit panicked. I hit the guardrail and the van rocked on its axles. There was a popping sound from the back and a screech of metal as the gurney, body and all, slid down between the seats. It slammed to a stop at the console with a meaty thud. I might have screamed. Not ashamed if I did. Finally, I got my foot on the brake and slowed the van down to a stop. My heart was beating so fast, I didn't want to look down, but I couldn't help myself. When the gurney had shifted it, it must have pushed the aero through, splitting through the body bag, making it open. It was torn from the top down to about the man's chest. He was in his 30s, about 200 pounds, with a week's worth of beard and a bald Cro-Magnon head. His skin was gray and cold-looking. His mouth was slightly opened, as were his eyes, and he was looking right at me. Now, I might have been tired. It might have been the shock of almost being crushed by 50 tons of trucking coal, but I swear to God, he reached up and took my cigarette out of my hand. The man in the body bag took a long draw and let the smoke out slowly like a country fog. A thin trickle of smoke drifted out from this bloody arrow wound. "You like pancakes?" he asked me, taking another drag. His brow got serious, like the question was important. Backing myself against the door, I could smell the beer on his breath. The hair on my arm stands on end, even now when I tell it. "Going up to Rita's," he told me. "They got 'em some mighty good pancakes. Just take a right once you're off the mountain." I sat there staring at him, laying there smoking my cigarette. I couldn't say a word. "You go get some pancakes. If you don't, you'll be sorry." After he said it, he reached up and passed me back my cigarette. I took it from him, my hand shaking and putting it in my mouth. My mind screamed out, "That was in a dead man's mouth!" Coughing and gagging, I tossed the cigarette out the window and spat. When I turned back to the man in the bag, he was just lying there, stone dead. Didn't look at all like he could have ever spoken a sound, let alone smoked one of my cigarettes. "Are you okay?" I asked, wincing at the idea of him giving an answer, but none came. He was surely dead, and I never wanted out of that van so bad in all my life. Switching on the ignition, the van came alive. I nearly jumped out of my seat as the radio came on and Jim Morrison's voice howled over the ionosphere at top volume. My trembling hand turned the radio off. I had to get off that mountain. Things in the van seemed to be running all right. My headlights and radio was all working proper, so I put the van in drive and headed down the mountain. Stealing a moment, I looked down at the body. Against all gravity and natural forces, the gurney slid itself to the back of the van, regardless of the fact that the van was almost pointed straight down. It snapped into place with a metal clank, and I lit up another cigarette. By the time I came down from Horsepin Mountain, the sun had begun to peek over the hills. My hands had finally stopped shaking. It had quit raining, and I hadn't heard a peep from the back. I was beginning to think I had dreamed the whole thing. Then there, on the side of the road, was a sign for Rita's Little Diner. Now, I don't remember seeing no sign when I first came through, but there it was. Pancakes did sound good. Wouldn't mind being out of the van for a bit, neither. I made a right, and in 6 minutes I was at the Little Red Diner. It was full of miners going to or coming from work. Got me some coffee, sausage links, and 2 of the best pancakes I had ever eaten. It might have added 40 minutes to my time, but it was worth it. When I left, I felt a world better, but I knew I didn't dream what happened. I sat down on the bumper of the van, smoked 3 cigarettes in a row. The morning sun pulled the cold and fear out of my bones. Spring warbles sang and country music floated from a pickup across the parking lot. It rallied my courage, and I buttoned my coat and got back in the van. Listening to the radio on my way back to Charleston, I knew about the accident before I came on it. Sitting there in traffic, looking down at the bent steel, blood, and wood chips made me believe had I been on time, I would have been in the middle of it. A logging truck had overturned and spilled its load over the 4-lane. 7 cars were totaled. 16 people went to the hospital, and 5 people died. I know because I took the logging truck driver back myself. I still work for Mr. Nettie. I still wander the roads in the middle of the night with my winter coat and my air conditioning. I don't get the willies, but I make sure to stay clear of Horsepin Mountain.